Okay. And we're ready.
We're ready.
Cool.
Thanks for doing this. What got you interested in aviation?
I suppose it goes back to World War II. I lived in the Catskills, and the pilots that were flying out of the Air Force bases north of me were coming over practicing. And we used to go to airports once in a while to watch the airplanes. During World War II, I was a little girl. And then by the time I was 16, I had 4 goals. I wanted to be a New York City policewoman, I wanted a college education, I wanted a family, and I wanted to learn to fly. So I went from there.
All right, and did you meet all those 4 goals?
Pretty much, yep.
Mm-hmm. So what did you study in college?
I went to George Washington University while I was working full-time as a controller at Andrews Air Force Base, and I studied psychology with minors in political science and sociology, which I loved. Mm-hmm. And they held the classes at Washington National, which was nice for me because I lived in Maryland at the time.
Right.
So I could get back and forth and, take the classes. At one point I started out with 1 class, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and while I was working I was taking a full load of college courses too. Well, I wanted to get it over with.
Right.
It was great. We had no courses in the college itself. They were all in satellite government buildings pretty much. Mm-hmm. So I graduated in, actually I finished up in 1976, but the graduation was held in 77 in February. Mm-hmm. And that was half the class. There's so many people in our George Washington class.
I can imagine.
And the main one was, of course, in May.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got an opportunity to put in for Kennedy at the New York TRACON. Mm-hmm. So I went up there.
So let me back up. So you were always interested in aviation
Yes,
from a little girl.
Yeah.
What led you to, I believe, the Army? And
well, I wanted a college education. I couldn't get on the police field in New York or LA because you had to be 20 and a half and have 2 years of college, which I didn't have. So, and I didn't have a scholarship to go to college. So I said, well, where am I going to get some training as a military police or as a policewoman? And I heard about the Army had military policewomen. I said, sign me up. So I did. I graduated high school in June of '59, and that summer I enlisted in the Army. Wow. For 3 years. Yep.
And you became a military police?
Yes, after a fashion. I found out once I got there that they didn't like 18-year-olds, but I was very good at my military courtesy and customs, shined all my brass and shoes, and I must have impressed them because they let me be an MP. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But they didn't train us. There was no training for the women MPs. There was no, we did the same jobs as the men, which was okay, but we didn't carry weapons other than a billy club, which I never used. And it was scary at times because we went through a couple of roadblocks and, mm-hmm. and so forth. But you live through it.
Yeah, what bases were you at?
I was at Fort McClellan, Alabama, which is the training center for the WACs back there in '59. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think back, my brain's trying to work here. Once I got through the MPs, and I couldn't get promoted. They wouldn't promote the women. I went to an E4, which was fine, but I wanted more. I wanted the schooling. I wanted to get promoted, and they said we don't promote to women. They would bring in one of the male MPs off the tour, off the road. And I had gone on to school to learn to be a clerk typist and went to the desk, and I was typing all the blotter entries. A lot of our MP desk sergeants were World War II types, and they weren't college educated. They didn't know how to write, so I got settled with that, which is okay. I learned a lot. Mm-hmm. And after about the 4th time that they did this, I said, this is enough. And I started flying in the civilian flying club there. My first ride aloft was in an Army helicopter. As soon as I got to Fort McClellan, I found out where the Army airfield was. I went out and begged a ride. We went up in a little hiller, H-23, and I told the guys I want to learn to fly. And they gave me a bunch of books, which I still have, about meteorology and navigation and all that sort of thing. I still have them. So I started flying at the civilian airport near Fort McClellan. But it was also during the time when they had the marches, if you remember. The buses were being turned over and burned and so forth.
Right.
They wouldn't even let us off the fort, which was fine, because it was very volatile down there then. So,
Right.
and it was quite interesting piece of history.
Imagine,
Yep.
yeah.
So then I went from there, I put in for air traffic control school finally in the Army, and they didn't have one. So they sent me to the Air Force School at Keesler Air Force Base, Mississippi. I went down there and for several months went through the schooling, and of course it checked out and everything. By this time I was the ranking member in the class, so the guys were all Air Force, so they were like E1s and E2s.
Okay.
And so I went through that school and I enjoyed it. Then they wanted to know if I wanted to stay for the radar portion. I said certainly. You know, so I learned how to run airplanes on a GCA, ground control, you know, on course, on glide path, and all that sort of thing. And when it came time to reassign me, they were going to send me to Huntsville, Alabama, but they didn't have room for women up there. There was no facilities for the women. So they finally hemmed and hawed and said, well, let's send her to Fort Rucker. So I went to Fort Rucker, Alabama, where the Army Aviation Center. And they were just building up for Vietnam back then. And am I doing something wrong, John?
Oh, you're doing fine. I'm just
Okay.
checking 2 cameras. So
All right.
don't mind me. Ignore me totally.
The where was I? Oh yeah, we transitioned from all fixed wing, almost beavers and bird dogs, to almost all helicopters within a year. And then they needed, of course I was in the tower by this time, and I checked out the tower, and then the guys, the civilians that were doing the precision radar GCAs didn't like them. And I said, well, I'll do them for you. They said, okay, come on over. So I went over to their facility, and I was running those part-time, and had a good time, except some of the instructors would pull an auto rotation on final and not tell me. It would scare the heck out of me because the airplanes, the helicopters would disappear off the scope.
Oh, no.
I said, well, and I finally remember what they were doing.
Right.
But it was unique. And then I started bootlegging, what I call bootlegging time on all the Army helicopters and, you know, aircraft that I could get my little body and sit in the seat. And of course I couldn't train. I put in for flight school in 65 and 66. They said, oh, we don't need women. So I said, well, all right, whatever. So went from there. Then I went to a civilian airport and soloed the Cessna 150. Scared the heck out of me. No, it didn't really. I enjoyed it, you know.
Right.
So I just, we're up to now what, 160, 65? Yeah. And I got out of the Army in 63 and that went back in when they had the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yes.
And that was October 62. And before that I bought a little 55 Thunderbird, which I loved. You know, the little convertibles? I loved it. And I left it home, big mistake. I had 2 younger brothers.
I'm sorry. Your microphone cable exposed.
Oh
Oh.
There we go. Okay.
It's
Sorry.
my heart is beating out. I'm so excited here.
You're doing fantastic.
It just bumped
Yeah,
that way
right?
out. So you left your Thunderbird at home?
I left it home. And about a month later, my father called me. He said, Susie, I got some bad news for you. I said, what? He says, your brothers borrowed your car. They didn't have permission to drive it, number one. And they wrecked it. I about died. I could have killed them, you know. So I never got to drive my little car again. But anyway, eventually I bought another car and continued on with my career in aviation and checked out at Fort Rucker. And then they needed instructors to teach the military pilots how to fly on instruments in a flight simulator. So I went to that school, and I taught instruments for quite a while.
So you're still in the Army?
Yep.
Okay.
And by now I'm at E5, which is good. At least I got promoted. Then they started bringing in the Vietnamese pilots. They had a hard time even speaking English, let alone flying in the trainer. And other military, Air Force, and some countries were sending their pilots over. So we were training from all over the world, which was quite interesting. Yeah.
I'll bet.
And the company, well, my boyfriend got killed in '66 in Vietnam. So I was heartbroken.
I bet.
So my tour was up. My second tour was up, and I I wanted to get out of the Army, and they wanted me to re-enlist, and they offered me another stripe. I was E6 by now, a staff sergeant, and they offered me another stripe to be a sergeant first class. I said, no, unless you can give me a warrant officer, I want to be an officer. But I didn't have my college. I passed all the exams in basic, but unless you had, you know, college, your exams out of the way, you couldn't go. So
Didn't know that.
I didn't either.
Yeah.
Not till then, but it doesn't matter. I left the Army and went to work for a civilian organization right there at Fort Rucker, doing this very same thing. Worked a tower in the morning and then trained the pilots in the afternoon or vice versa. And eventually those people, Ross Aviation, they supplied both the controllers and the instructors and the pilots to train the helicopter pilots. They decided to go on strike. I said, well, I'm not going on strike. So I quit, went right back to New York. Down in southern region, they weren't hiring women or blacks, which ticked me off, but I was told that's what was happening.
Wow.
So I tried several times to get on with the southern region, and that didn't happen. So I went back to New York, got hired right away, and was offered 4 jobs. Boston Center, Nantucket Tower, Houghton Millinocket Flight Service Station, and Albany Tower, which I lived 100 miles from, upstate New York.
Okay.
So I took that option, and I went back, and that's when I came into the FAA in '68.
68.
And that's when I met Jackie. at
You
school.
met at school in Oklahoma?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we went through that schooling, and then she was reassigned to LA, where she was, you know, had opted to go, and I went back to Albany. Well, I worked there 4 years.
How many women were in the tower at Albany? Just you?
Me, yeah. Every facility I was in, I was the only one.
Really? Any hazing or harassment from
You've
your...
got to be kidding! That was an everyday event. I mean, they can't. They couldn't get to me. Whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They forget that there were women there during World War II training all those towers and centers all across the United States.
Exactly.
So I didn't bring it up, or you know.
Mm-hmm.
I just tried to do my job. But one of the first things I did, I was reading through the ATP, their traffic manual, and everything in there was he and his, which kind of ticked me off. I took it down and laid it on my chief's desk. I said, Chief, I said, I can't use this manual. He looked at me and he says, why? I said, because it deals with just men. I said, I'm not a man. I've never been a man. I never will be a man. I want my own language in there. He says, well, if you feel strongly enough about it, you know, write to the region, write to the headquarters, and I did. And they changed it. So you can have an impact, you know, this little one.
Exactly, wow.
So that helped.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I checked out there, and I tried to transfer to a bigger facility, because this was a level 3, which was fine.
Right.
You know, you worked the radar of the tower. But I wanted more. I wanted to work more traffic in a bigger facility. And I had met a supervisor from Washington National Tower up at Syracuse at a clam bake for, you know, several towers and so forth. And we started running back and forth. You didn't have cell phones, you didn't have emails, so it's long distance. And eventually he asked me to marry him.
Oh.
So I said, well, okay. And I went down and got married, and I got transferred to Dulles International. I was the first woman in Dulles.
Mm-hmm.
And then those guys found out that I not only was not in the union, I don't like unions,
Okay.
because it was all male, and I
That was
just
going
got
to be one
tired
of my
of it.
questions.
Yeah, I just got tired of them. And when they found out that I was married to a supervisor and not in the union, they all went out and bought the smelliest cigars they could find, and they started blowing all smoke at me. Well, you have to ignore all that crap, because
Oh,
it was
wow.
going on all the time. So,
Right.
so I wasn't wanted there. There was a fella at Andrews Tower that lived in Virginia near Dulles, and I lived in Maryland near Andrews. So he said, would you swap with me? I said, sure, if the chiefs approved it.
Mm-hmm.
So we put in our paperwork and went through the region, and the region finally said, okay, so we swapped around
Mm-hmm.
after a fashion. So I checked out at Andrews, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Andrews Air Force Base. They had several patterns. You had civilian aircraft at one level, then you had the recips at another, then you had jets coming at another level, and you'd have flights of F-105s, F-8s, and so forth coming in and out. So
Wow.
got a lot busier, a lot busier.
What year did you go to Andrews?
73.
73,
Yeah,
okay.
that's also when I started college.
Oh,
And
okay.
GW
Right.
opened up the program
Mhm.
for college. I have to stop and think where I'm at, because I get going sometimes, I forget to stop. Anyway, I went through that, went through the schooling there, which was no problem, and worked the radar and worked at GCAs, I did a lot of GCAs, and of course Air Force One every once in a while.
Right.
I let not Reagan, but Nixon take off on the wrong runway one time. Well, it wasn't my fault. He had a pilot from World War II, 50 Mission Crest Colonel Albertazzi, I think his name was, and he was just the bulldog in the sky. When he flew, you better get the heck out of his way. So when he took over our airport, you know, and he taxied fast. I don't know if he was actually doing the taxiing, but of course you had to clear the field of all the aircraft so Air Force One could go, which I did. But the west runway, 19 right, had been closed for several months for resurfacing. And apparently he either didn't read the NOTAM or didn't pay any attention to it. And so he called for a takeoff. I said, Air Force One, runway 19 right, gave him the wind, cleared for takeoff. He taxied straight across and went to another runway. It was a very short taxiway. So should I say, Air Force One, 100% make a 180 and go to the right runway, or let him take off and hope he doesn't blow a tire?
Right.
So I let him go, and he took off on the incorrect runway, and I probably the only one ever got away with that. I don't think the supervisor even caught it. Anyway, no blown tires, and he took off and did his thing. Yeah, right? And so from there, in '77, like I said, I graduated college and put in for, I didn't tell you this, but my marriage was a shambles. I found that he was an alcoholic, abusive. I came to the kitchen floor one time on my stomach, and he had this arm wrapped all the way around, back up to the back of my head. It shattered every ligament in my shoulder, which still bothers me, but he was just an ordinary man, just, you know, couldn't handle alcohol. So I just wanted to get away from him. He said, well, I'm going to follow